Hello, I am Jeffrey Zielinski, co-founder of the Serviceberry Group and host of the Branch Network podcast. Joining me today, I'm really excited to have Dr. Heather Pane, who has really become a friend over the last several years. Your mentorship and you working with our son and our family has really meant a lot. And so in addition to being a vital part of our at-home team, I'm proud to say that you've become a friend as well. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you for doing this. You have quite a rap sheet, so I'm going to do my best, reading off my notes here, kind of give the people a little bit of your background. Heather has over 30 years experience specializing in applied behavior analysis, or ABA, which is what we'll spend the vast majority of our time talking about today. Her experience includes working at private not-for-profit schools for individuals with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, providing training and consultation to public school programs, and providing direct instruction, training, and consultation in the home and community setting. She is a doctorate-level board-certified behavior analyst. Heather has also presented at many local and national conferences, has peer-reviewed research publications, and was the recipient of awards for both her thesis and dissertation research. Her research interests include teaching play and social skills, which means a lot to us, to children with ASD, naturalistic teaching, and training special education staff to use evidence-based practices in the classroom. Heather, thanks again.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you. So what I thought I might do, and this is kind of consistent with how we've had some other interviews and conversations, is just, in its simplest, purest form, can you tell us what ABA is? And maybe plain English and how you think about it as a place to start.
Sure. So applied behavior analysis, it might sound a little overwhelming or technical, but it quite simply is looking at behavior, identifying how behavior works, what influences behavior, and how learning happens. So to break that down, what we do in applied behavior analysis is we look for skills that will be important to our clients. Now, clients can be, children that we serve. It could be family members. What are those skills that will help them have a more meaningful life that we can teach them? And we use a science-based approach. So what that means is basically there's research, there's been a lot of studies done to support the strategies that we're using. Now, ABA can be used, as I said, to increase skills. So we want to work on the skills that will help an individual improve the quality of their life. But also ABA can be used to decrease behaviors that are potential barriers to them meeting their goals, like problem behavior that might interfere with their ability to interact with their community or form friendships or, for adults that might have problem behavior, that might mean they want to have a job and they're unable to do so because of those problem behaviors. So ABA works on increasing skills that will be important for individuals and decreasing those problem behaviors that might be barriers to their goals.
Yeah. In the beginning, so much of this was overwhelming just as a parent. I knew very little about ABA. For a parent that, may be in my former shoes, I can tell you so much. I think when I think about behaviors, my mind automatically kind of goes to like disciplinary type things. Can you talk a little bit about how that's not necessarily the case?
Yeah.
And maybe it's a piggybacking off of some of the stuff that you just had already mentioned.
Right. So often when we hear behavior, we think problem behavior, right? We think that we have to decrease behaviors, but really ABA is more about those positive behaviors. If you think about why an individual might be engaging in problem behavior, it's probably a lack of something, right? Are they unable to communicate, especially little ones? So if they're having a tantrum or they're engaging in some, aggressive behavior, are they unable to communicate? What are they telling us with that problem behavior? And they're unable to communicate that to us. So we have to teach those skills. The more skills, positive skills we can teach and reinforce, then the less problem behavior we will see. So yes, it's often a misconception that, if a behavior analyst is in the school setting to see your child, they must have problem behavior. No, that's not the case. We're there to help build skills.
Yeah, admittedly, that was probably something I felt in the beginning, and some of those behaviors were challenges that
Yeah.
well that we were
Mm-hmm.
working on with our son,
Mm-hmm.
and what we learned quickly was that rewards were probably more impactful than any sort of quote unquote disciplinary type action.
Exactly. Yeah.
In
And
fact,
also the word consequence, right? We often think, like
mm,
you said, punishment, disciplinary action, but consequences are positive too. They're all around us, right? So what follows the behavior can be positive or negative, and we want to capitalize on following those good behaviors, those appropriate behaviors with a positive consequence.
yeah, amen. Before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of this a little bit, I've asked, I think, probably every therapist I've worked
Hmm.
with. I'm always curious, like, what drew you into ABA? Was it something personal, just a
Yeah.
professional goal that you've always had? I'm just curious to know what drew you to the profession and to the
Yeah,
study.
sure. So in my undergrad, I was at Rider University and I was there for elementary education and psychology. So I was a dual major. And I was very interested in both. But for psychology, I mean, again, this is going way back. So we had a course called behavior modification, right? So I learned a lot about positive reinforcement during that course. And I also had a specific course on developmental disabilities where I learned a lot about autism and other related developmental disabilities. So for my psychology major, I had to do an internship. And the two options were to learn to counsel students on campus or to work at a school called Princeton Child Development Institute, PCDI, which was for individuals with autism. And at that point, besides my coursework, I didn't know a whole lot about it. I knew I didn't want to counsel students on campus. That just wasn't for me. So I went to PCDI, and literally the minute I walked through those doors, I knew it was the place I wanted to be. They were just so kind and compassionate, and the professionalism there and how they put their students ahead of everything. And I learned how to interact with the individuals there. And it was mostly kids, how to facilitate their learning, how to collect data. And I knew once I was there, that's what I wanted to do. And luckily there was a group of staff there that were doing some intense training because another school like PCDI was opening up in Bergen County, Institute for Educational Achievement. And so I had to finish my schooling. And once I did that, I called IEA and interviewed, and that's where I really fell in love with behavior analysis and really everything they do. And I spent many years there getting really great training. So that's my story. Elementary education was my goal to be a teacher, and I, found that I wanted to do behavior analysis.
Cool. Thanks for
Hmm.
sharing that.
Hmm.
So getting into the weeds a little bit, again, it's probably a question I've asked most of the folks that I've talked to. When you think about ABA, again, autism spectrum disorder is something that is meaningful to us, but my assessment is that it's probably not only limited to children or people with autism. How does ABA, or where's the best application for ABA? I'm assuming it's fairly wide, but could you talk a little bit about who may benefit? What are your typical patient candidates for ABA? And maybe expand a little bit on that, because again, telling you from a parent's point of view, that was another sort of misconception that I had. It was like
Right,
limited to ADHD or autism. I'm
right.
learning that
Yeah.
that's maybe not so much the case, but would love to hear from you about
Yeah,
that.
sure. So yes, ABA is widely used for individuals with ASD. However, the application is pretty extensive, areas that are really interesting that I don't even have the experience in, such as, increasing skills of athletes, organizational management. There's so many different areas that ABA can be used. My particular area is more in education, working with not just individuals with ASD, but like you had mentioned, others with ADHD or learning disabilities. And that could be in a self-contained classroom, or it could be, in a general education classroom. Its utility is really for, like I said, improving behavior and increasing skills. So I've even been asked to go into general education classrooms to provide training to teachers on using behavior analysis with the whole group of students. Like, how can we increase on-task behavior, increase learning, increase responding of the general education? So it's not just, for autism, it's not, as we mentioned in the beginning, to decrease behaviors, but it's teaching academic skills,
Hmm.
teaching self-help skills, daily living skills. My youngest client I ever worked with, which was really fun, was 18 months old, right? So you could see how it would be differently applied to an 18
Yeah.
month old, right? And you look at what skills does that little guy need to be able to continue to develop and have meaningful relationships. And I also work with adults, and that could look very different. ABA is not just for children, not just for children with ASD, but in the adult world, it's how can we help prepare young adults to obtain jobs and hold on to jobs and live independently and have meaningful relationships with friends and others. So, yeah, for me, yes, I work with individuals of all backgrounds, but far beyond my training, there are other applications of that. It could be in the medical area, such as working in hospitals or substance abuse. So it is a science, it's a
Yeah.
science, and the application is very far reaching.
So piggybacking off of that, perfect segue. So we've mentioned the word behavior quite a bit.
Hmm.
Um, and again, something I've talked about fairly consistently here is that what I have found in the last couple years working with you and various other therapists, whether it's occupational therapy, speech therapy, is that there's a sort of ancillary benefit to working on a particular skill or a particular behavior. Can you talk a little bit about how you may be, and I'll use myself as an example. Some of
Hmm.
our concerns were behaviors,
Hmm.
and trying to find different ways to create maybe more acceptable behaviors
Hmm.
is a way I might explain it. But it wasn't just behaviors that you were working on, because what we found is maybe mechanical skills got better, confidence got better, social skills got better because we were working on these different verticals. You talk a little bit about we've established that it's vast, but maybe how they intertwine a bit and how you work with other therapists as part of a more holistic plan of action.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It should be collaborative, right? So we shouldn't be working in isolation because applied behavior analysis can be used across several domains and skills. We want to work with other professions, like you mentioned, OT. I will often work with occupational therapists in, teaching skills like tying shoes. I'm currently working with a client, and that's a behavior skill that you're teaching. You have to have a lot of patience for because it's not easy, right? And
Right.
so to be able to collaborate with somebody else who has knowledge and experience in that is really important to learn, like, what are the dynamics, like you said, the motor skills, and how can we use reinforcement and prompts to effectively teach that skill. So it is
Yeah.
very collaborative. It should not be seen as sort of like a pull-out, session. It shouldn't
Mhm.
be 30 minutes of applied behavior analysis. In the school setting specifically, it should be collaborated with OTs, speech teachers, so that, like you said, we're treating the whole child and their entire day, not just one
Yeah.
piece. And same with the home program as well. If an individual is receiving ABA in the home, an important factor is working with the parents.
Yeah.
It's like explaining tools to the parents and what strategies can be used, because the behavior technician, the instructor leaves, right? And then the parent needs those tools to be able
Yeah.
to, effectively make sure those skills they've learned in session generalize to be
Yeah.
functional.
Yeah. We're huge on collaboration. I say it all the time, and I'll use speech as an example. That was probably the first spidey sense for us was the speech, kind of plateaued, and it wasn't at a place where we thought was appropriate for our son's age. But what we found was that when he was able to communicate better with us, some of the frustration levels would come down. When we were able to implement rewards as part of his behavior system, suddenly, we were not focusing so much on correcting behaviors as much as we are spending more quality interactions together. And so I always found these things so intertwined, and collaboration is obviously a huge part of that. Again, perfect segue, thinking about the sessions, and my guess is that they probably look different for everybody. But walk us through, how you think about sessions with a particular child or whatever it might
Hmm.
be, a
Okay.
client of yours.
Hmm.
Again, I know that's probably a broad question, but I'm curious to see how you kind of think through that,
Hmm.
start to finish, and how that evolves.
Hmm.
One thing I've noticed, our goals change pretty frequently. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it's a good thing. It means that you're making progress, but you
Yes.
have to sort of re-evolve to kind of, keep the good
Yeah.
going. Right. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear from you how you think
Hmm.
about a session and planning, short and long term.
Sure. Yeah. That's a very important question. Like you said, it should be individualized. We as behavior technicians or BCBAs should not walk in with a plan and say, here's what we're doing before we've done any type of assessment. So assessment is really important. Meeting with the parents to know what are the parents' goals, um, what skills does the child have or not have that we need to teach. So doing some kind of formal assessment and collaborating with the parents to know what we're going to teach. So that's step one. Step two is really forming a relationship with the child first, right? We're not going in there to do work and drills. Like we have to pair ourselves with the child and fun things and build that relationship. And if it's a young child, we're on the floor with them, we're playing with them, we're finding out what their interests are, because we want to use that during the session. And again, it's very individualized. So some sessions for kids can be all on the floor at first, right? And we're just playing and we're taking advantage of opportunities during that play to teach our goals. So if it's communication and we're working on a child requesting for something, when they go to reach for their toy and they can't reach it, then we're modeling, help me, or I want what it is they want, using that item that's reinforcing to them. And during that play, interacting with them and taking advantage of all those natural opportunities to teach. Now, for some other kids, that might include what we would call discrete trial instruction. And that's where we sit more like one-to-one. We present a trial, and it's a lot of rehearsals. We provide prompts and reinforcement until they gain that skill. So there's naturalistic teaching opportunities, there's discrete trial. And again, it's very individualized. If I'm working with a high school student, then it's going to look very differently as well. So sessions really need to be individualized. We need to build in that positive relationship, reinforcement, find what they like to do, and work with the parents to ensure, if this is in a home program, that we're working on skills that will be functional and help the child be more successful.
Can you talk a little bit about the reward system a little bit? It's something that was meaningful for us. Our son being wickedly smart, he learned very quickly, like, oh, if I do something, I get a reward
Yeah.
for it if I've
Mm-hmm.
earned it. And maybe I'm bouncing around a little bit, but we've talked about like token economies and all
Mm-hmm.
this kind of stuff to
Mm-hmm.
create an environment such
Mm-hmm.
that we're almost persuading, behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I've found is there has to be a balance, and that balance is, at least in our case, was particularly challenging to strike because he was so smart and is so smart and would, oh, I put my plate in the garbage, let me get a candy bar. It's like, well, not so fast. You talk a little bit about that balance and how and it's not just, constant gimmies. We're really creating an environment to,
Mm-hmm.
again, not just persuade that behavior, but really make it part of a normal part of
Mm-hmm.
life, if that
Yeah.
makes any
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah, so initially, when first working with an individual, especially a young child, like I said, we want to find what will function as a reinforcer. What do they like,
Mm,
right? So I might show up to a session with stickers and think that's a reinforcer for the child. Other kids might like stickers, but if your son doesn't like a sticker, it won't function as a reward. So we first have to find out what their preferences are. We call that a preference assessment. What are their likes? And then we can use those items, especially in the beginning, at a higher rate of reinforcement, meaning every skill we're teaching, the correct response or the behavior we're looking for, what would follow? The reinforcer. Because if we have something preferred that follows a behavior we're looking for, it's more likely that a behavior will occur again in the future because they want that item, right? So in the beginning, it's very heavy on that positive reinforcement. But as you said, we do eventually want to get to the point where an individual, even just like us, right? We don't expect to get something good every time we do something.
That'd be nice.
Right? Wouldn't it be nice? It's not realistic. So at some point, decisions are made that once a skill is in the child's repertoire, then we start to move away from providing that contrived reinforcement and shift it and use it for the other skills that they're currently learning, the newer skills. And we also try to capture like those natural reinforcers in the environment. So that could be like in a home, if dessert, right? So you eat your dinner, you put your plate in the sink, you come back to the table, your dessert is there, right? So that's a natural reinforcer. So really trying to find the right balance, because we also don't want kids to satiate, right? If you give them too much of the preferred
Right.
item, then it's not effective anymore. And again, like you had said, it's not necessarily practical for parents to be reinforcing every single response. So
Right.
it's really having a goal, right? Especially for parents, it's different when you're out of session and you can't necessarily reinforce everything, but having a goal that this is the skill or this is the behavior we're saving that reinforcement for and providing that reinforcement.
Yeah, that makes sense. So backtracking a little bit, again, maybe a parent going through this the first time, they go through like the evaluation process. Perhaps there's already been a diagnosis. Now, ABA has been recommended. I can tell you for virtually every therapeutic intervention, whether it's been speech, whether it's been occupational therapy, whether it's been ABA, um, there's always been that feeling of like getting gut punched because you have as a parent in your mind, like, okay, we're going to work on speech. And then you find out like we're woefully behind peers. Then you go for occupational therapy because maybe there's a clumsiness or the motor skills aren't quite, maybe they're not playing on the playground the same way. And then you get a 10-page document listing other deficiencies that you aren't even thinking of. ABA has been the same in many ways. We thought some of this sort of 0 to 100 type behavior was the thing that we were going to work on. We come to find out it's probably associated with 2 or 3 different things. So
Right.
that's very overwhelming to a parent. So one, and maybe this is a loaded question, but what would you say to those parents? And obviously we've had these conversations, so I have some degree of what you might say. But what if you're putting yourself in the parent's shoes? Like, what should they ask? We're being overwhelmed. We're being thrown 50 million things. Like, how should we kind of take a step back and just assess this data? It's like a 2 or 3-parter. I'm sorry, but there's a lot there.
Okay. So I would first say yes. I'm sure it can be very overwhelming for parents. As the one writing the evaluation and doing the assessment, it's quite extensive. That helps to get services, which is a plus, right? But also I can see that being very overwhelming to see
Yeah.
maybe all the deficits that are there. And that's why we have goals and objectives. So that kind of helps to shape the program. So there might be a lot of skills we have to work on, but for right now, these next few months, here are the goals that we're going to work on, and just focusing on that and taking small steps
Piece by
towards the
piece.
bigger picture. Yeah. So that's, I think, one, the way I try my best to present it to parents, that here's what we're going to work on. And when you break skills down for a child, it's more likely they'll acquire them rather than trying just to get to the end result so quickly. And you had mentioned progress. That's why we collect data to see, visually see the progress being made, which I think is really helpful to share with parents. So I think if parents are not being shown the data, they should be asking, right? Not assuming that their child is making progress. They should be saying, can I see the data? Can I see the progress my child is making or maybe not making? And if that's the case, then, behavior analysts that are in that program need to make decisions and make changes so that progress can be made. I think I answered two of your questions, but I'm not
No,
sure I get
no,
the
I,
last.
I, I I think you nailed it. And I love that point, and I'll make it a point of emphasis about asking the questions, asking for the data. I'll be perfectly candid with you, Heather. I didn't even know the magnitude of the data that you all were collecting when, Melissa and Brittany here every single day. And it took me a long time to really see just the sheer amount of information, of data that was being collected on virtually every interaction, every question that was asked, every, reward or inappropriate behavior. I mean, it was everything. And what I would emphasize on that, again, learning this from you and some of the interactions we've had with the education system, is the same applies. Like, you can ask for the data, you're entitled to that data. We had no clue.
Mm.
And like, part of the reason that we're doing this work and this platform, Patty and I, is because we want parents to be able to have these tools, because you don't know what you don't know. It's
Yeah.
very isolating. And I can't emphasize how important that point is that you just made
Mm-hmm.
about asking questions, asking for the
Mm-hmm.
data, and ask
Mm-hmm.
questions on the data. I don't understand all of it. I'm a
Yes,
parent.
that is a
Um,
very good point, and I'd like to, back you up on that. So when parents ask for the data, like, it shouldn't just be like, here's the data, right? It should be a collaboration. It should be a meeting to say, okay, what data are you interested in seeing? Well, I really want to know how my child is doing on X, Y, and Z. And for the behavior analyst to bring those data up and to explain what those patterns mean and to show like the changes that possibly were made to increase acquisition and where are we going next. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you don't want the whole data binder or the whole Excel sheet just sent to
right.
you, right? It needs to be a collaborative process so that parents can really understand, it's their child. And they also, parents know their children best. So looking at that data, they could share some valuable information, like saying like, well, I think the data are high here because every Sunday night we're up a little bit later and Monday morning is not the best. So, yeah, collaboration is key.
It really is, and not to beat it to death, but I can't tell you how many times, working with Melissa and Brittany in particular, they'd be like, we noticed a trend here, but we also, that was the week that X, Y, and Z happened. Do you think there's a correlation? Like, there probably is. And maybe that wasn't always the case universally speaking, but because we talked to them so frequently, there rarely was ever a gap, or if there was a mystery, we figured it out pretty quickly, and we're able to pivot, we're able to evolve, we're able to maybe not, outright change the goals, but change the approach,
Mm-hmm.
for the next week, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. It's just so incredibly important. And I say it all the time, like, it also helps you be better. If we're
Mm-hmm.
telling you what's going on, if we're having a rough day at school, maybe sleep hasn't been particularly good the last several weeks. It's important for you to know that, for
Yes.
every reason under the sun. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're going to be
Rest.
grumpy. And so
Absolutely.
let's not, force things. Let's take a little bit of a different approach here.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. There are those variables. We call those setting events, right? There's, things going on in everyone's life that affects behavior. And so if a
Bingo.
child's not sleeping well, or maybe, dad's away on a business trip, that's a big change for any
Yeah.
child. So that impacts behavior. And like you said, then we'd have to adjust to that. And it's important for school to know those variables, the home program, because it might mean that, we need to break things down a little bit more. We need to decrease demands or build in more breaks for them. Yeah, so it's really important to have that open communication, because it's not just what's going on in the session. It's not just what's going on at school. It's really, all
Yeah.
those variables that affect behavior
Yep.
and learning.
And I could say you guys have taken it very seriously. There hasn't been any bit of information where they're like, "Oh, we didn't need to know that."
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
we've ever said has been taken very seriously, very literally, and I could tell you we've appreciated it. In the early stages, when I was kind of first doing my homework on ABA, before I had even met you, some of the criticisms that I saw were, it's this sort of forced mechanism of trying to just to manufacture behaviors and stuff like that. I don't subscribe to that. I've lived it now for a couple of years. I don't see any of that, and maybe that's just been my experience. I don't know. I'll leave that for you to opine on, maybe. But how do you balance individualism with trying to create more preferred behaviors? You know my son well. He's a very charismatic young boy, ton of energy, a ton of energy. But we love that about him. But sometimes that energy could create some challenges. I think you all have done such a nice job at letting him be him, but also reminding him like, okay, buddy, now we gotta work on some things here. And that's been a work in progress.
Mhm.
How do you balance that in real time? Because I just
Mhm.
find that to be so important. We want these people, these kids, to be who they are. We
Right.
also want to make sure that we're weaving in acceptable behaviors and things like that so that they're able to learn, that they're able to socialize in an appropriate way. It's challenging, but I'd love
Mhm.
to hear from you how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We want children, we want students to follow certain directions and be able to follow routines that occur maybe in a school setting or at a playground, right? But we don't want to take away from, like you said, the individual child. So, for example, like an individual that has lots of energy, it wouldn't make sense to try to force them to sit for real long periods of time. That's not going to work. And that's not fair to the individual either. So we have to find that balance. We have to identify what their needs are, right? Can we teach them the skill they need to be successful, let's say in school, right? And participate in a lesson, learn from the head teacher while also capitalizing on who they are. So if it's taking every 30 minutes, taking a break to go jump on the
Yeah.
trampoline or taking a walk or being the teacher's helper and delivering messages and then coming back to that lesson. So it's finding what's going to work for that individual, not forcing any particular skill. It has to be socially important for the individual. And we have to find ways, I keep going back to like motivation, to capitalize on what they like, what motivates them so that they can be successful. So I do
Yeah.
think it's definitely a balance. And also there are skills that we might think are important for an individual and then we eventually learn or not. Like to give a good example, we typically, for young kids that are not able to color, we might think that might be a leisure skill they might one day be interested in. So let's teach a child to color, right? But we might quickly learn that that's not a preferred activity. And so why implement that program if it's not something that's preferred by the child? Let's capitalize on what they do like and keep offering other activities that maybe they haven't been exposed to yet and see if it becomes a preference and if it's something that is aligned with who they are.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Coloring in particular is not something my son cares much for, but I'll tell you, there was probably a point in time where like, yeah, he's got to learn how to color in
Yeah.
lines. But like in hindsight, is it that important?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it's not, especially now.
Right.
But
Hmm.
there's things that as parents, like we almost obsess on because we think like, oh, he or she's got to know how to do this, or they're behind in X, Y, and Z, and then as time passes and I'm a few years into this journey, you kind of learn some of these things that I obsessed so much energy on was probably not all that important or
Hmm.
meaningful in the grand scheme
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk a lot about celebrating small wins, big wins, everything in between. I'm smiling just thinking of all the celebrations that have happened in my den over virtually everything. And it brings a tear to my eye just how engaging the girls are and the team is because they do. They celebrate every win. He eats it up. We eat it up. I'm probably answering your question here, but talk to me a little bit about the importance of celebration of almost that like overzealous response
Hmm.
to achieving goals.
Hmm.
What does that do to their psyche, to
Hmm.
their development? And I'll tell you, as a parent, it's so rewarding It's everything. It's like it just gives you that recharge that you need because there's days that you just feel down about everything. And then when you hear the borderline Times Square ball drop, you're like, all right, we got this. We're back.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you and all your experience,
Yeah,
how
sure.
important it is.
Yeah. Well, it was great to hear your perspective from a parent to,
It's everything.
hear in session those celebrations of learning, right? And to get so excited. So yeah, it's so important, especially because, in ABA, we break skills down into small steps, right? So we are reinforcing those small steps, those small goals towards a bigger goal. And it's very important that we celebrate those moments. I mean, the kids that I work with, of all ages, the young adults, they work harder than anybody I know.
Yep.
And so they
Amen.
deserve to celebrate.
Amen.
It might seem like something so small to me or to somebody from the outside, but to hear, I've worked with so many children, but for a mom to hear their child just look up and say hi, for the first time, and that is a huge accomplishment, whereas somebody else might not realize the extensiveness and how hard that child worked to get to that point. So celebrating those small steps is really important because of how hard individuals work to get there. And also just that praise, like you said, it just makes it more of a positive environment, especially when we might be working with individuals that have the problem behavior, right? And so we're trying to work through those difficult moments. So let's celebrate all the small ones, to really make the experience more positive for everybody.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. You kind of answered my next question. I was going to ask what you thought people understood about the actual children receiving ABA, but I think you just hit the nail on the head. Um, it's the magnitude of work. It's. I think sometimes we almost don't give credit to the, I'll say kids in this
Mm-hmm.
case.
Mm-hmm.
It is, it's a full-time job. They go to school. That's
Yeah.
borderline a job. That's, 6,
Mm-hmm.
7 hours a day. You come home,
Mm-hmm.
then you might have OT. You might have OT
Mm-hmm.
and, physical therapy
Right.
at school. You come home, then you have ABA. It's if I were to count the hours, it probably, my little corporate job or whatever, probably pales
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to the amount
Yeah.
of time my son puts
Mm-hmm.
into school and therapy and stuff like that. The magnitude of the work, I just think we needs to be underscored. And I'm proud of him. I'm
Yeah.
proud of how he's stuck with it, and all these kids. I've met some amazing families, and I'm so proud to be a part of this community and everything. It's always meant a lot to us, but it's that was a real eye opener for us, is just the sheer magnitude of the intervention, of the amount of work, and that itself could be frustrating, right? We talk about this, collaboration and talking.
Mm-hmm.
I did an interview with an OT therapist, who's been a part of our journey for a while, and she said, I think really well, like sometimes you just like let them sit on the couch and have a
Yeah.
snack.
Yeah.
They
Right.
need a break
Yeah.
too.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's the other part of it. So we know the intervention works, and the more of it, the better quality of life, right? But they are kids, or they are young teenagers, right? Or young adults. And that's why we have to make sure that we have that positive approach, and we're finding the things that they like to do and including them in session and at school, and giving them those breaks just to be a
yeah,
kid and to
yeah.
relax and to watch TV. And yes, absolutely.
We just did a session at the park
Mhm.
and ran to the monkey bars. That's his love, monkey bars and roller coasters. And while it was a session, it was play. It was fun. You
Yes.
got to go on the zip line, and Dad threw him across the thing too
Mhm.
fast, and you got to chase the other kids. And so yeah, I think again, you guys have done an exceptional job, but it's all sort of weaving it all together. Kind of thinking about ABA as it's evolved. How do you see like the future of ABA? And I'll give you a reason I even thought about this question. So I did an interview with somebody on our team, Beth, who she's a DIR practitioner. And like one thing she brought up is like, some insurance companies are actually starting to cover this. Now it's probably one, and it's probably, a very specific type of insurance. It's not broadly being covered, but that's a good sign, I think. I've, at least the research that I've done is probably more surface level than the extent that you've done. It seems like ABA is becoming a more widely accepted, more widely utilized form of therapy. But what do you see as I don't say the future, but more just like how do you see it evolving?
Hmm.
Um, and I'm thinking about that in the context also of you're seeing more ASD diagnoses and all of these types of things. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I've been in the field a long time, as you mentioned, 30 years, right? And so it has really evolved and it has become more available. When I first started in public schools, it was not common to have a behavior analyst supporting staff in the public school setting. And now, especially New Jersey, I can only really speak for New Jersey. I have some experience in New York, given that I'm assistant professor for Damon University, which is in Buffalo, New York. So that's a graduate program that I work for. So I understand like the differences across states, right? But in New Jersey, the services have really advanced in terms of behavior analysis, ABA being in the public school setting. So that's really encouraging to me, right? And it's more
Mm,
collaborative now as well. I feel in the past it was more isolated. You know,
sure.
we kind of worked alone, right? It's much more collaborative now in terms of working on a team with OT, speech, special education staff. So it really has evolved. There's a wealth of research on the use of behavior analysis. And I think, that's really getting out there and people are understanding that better. Moving forward, I hope that we continue to see it advance and help in other areas. The other area is, like you had said, insurance. Many insurance companies do cover applied behavior analysis because it is evidence-based. So again, going back to when I first started, that for many years was not an option. So it's involved in so many ways to help people. Now, in terms of insurance-based services, it really is only for ASD. So,
Well, I was gonna
right.
mention that. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, that is a disservice to other individuals that could really benefit from behavior analysis. So I would hope to see some changes in that area in the future if possible. I mean, in public schools in general, no, it's not limited to ASD, right? Educators, administrators are acknowledging that ABA, behavior analysis can help in other diagnoses or different types of classrooms. So that's a positive as well. But yeah, in terms of insurance-based services, we're really only seeing that for ASD.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's true for all 50 states at this point.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's an autism related
Mm-hmm.
service. I
Mm-hmm.
agree with you. And, part of what we hope to achieve over time, whether it's advocacy or what we could do, we find, cost prohibitions to be not something we like. I don't know, we're trying to find ways to make a difference there. But I agree with you. One thing I try to be careful of is I don't want to box in special needs. I don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
box in disabilities and things like that. It's enormously wide.
Mm-hmm.
Some are seen, some are unseen. And I've learned that well over the last several years. And I think of ABA, I think of OT, speech, physical therapy, all of these things as they're not one dimensional either. And as they evolve and as they continue to get, greater social acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
I hope to see more, whether it's insurance intervention or more advocacy, because I've seen it firsthand how important it's been. Borderline remarkable. There was sometimes, you kind of sit and think like, oh gosh, are they ever going to have X or Y and Z? And, I don't have a lot of that. We
Mm-hmm.
certainly as parents have things that we think about, but I tie a lot of our son's success and development back to,
Mm-hmm.
you guys certainly, but really all of the therapies that have been a part
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
his programming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First, did I miss anything? Is there anything that is on your heart, or you'd like to add? I hope you would do something like this with me again. Maybe we
Yeah.
can dissect a specific topic and take it a
Right.
little bit deeper. But anything you think
Yeah.
maybe I missed?
One thing I would like, and it goes into what we were just talking about, is that ABA it can also be effective as individuals get older and useful, right? So I do get disappointed when, individuals are going into high school And there's sort of this feeling like, well, we should be removing the ABA services, right? No, maybe if we can do that and it's time for that, yes. But ABA can still be used to help individuals at the high school level or post high school. I work with adults with disabilities, and it can be very useful. It might look very different, but it's still focused on positive reinforcement. So I would hope that in the future, there's more support for individuals that are adults that would benefit from applied behavior analysis. And again, it looks very different.
Yeah.
It's not discrete trial, like we would start off, in maybe the school system, but it's really breaking skills down, supporting them in what's going to make their life more meaningful, whether that's, they would like to hold a part-time job or live in an apartment alone. What skills do they need to be able to successfully do that? And how can we support them in that?
Yeah, I love that point. I was talking to Renee. We were talking about like transitions, and I like to follow public policies quite a bit. And I know there's a bunch of proposals about, even transitioning from like high school to college, maybe not the IEP transferring necessarily, but, disability qualifications and stuff like that. Like, I agree with you that there tends to just be this cliff,
Yeah.
and it's like you've reached a certain age or you've retained a certain skill. And we experienced it, as you probably would
Yes.
remember. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
this isn't necessary anymore. It's like, well, time out.
Right.
That's not
Right.
true here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a really good point, that this is, again, it's an evolution, but this isn't, there's a glide path here. I was talking to Angeli about this sort of topic, and she had mentioned something like, we want to get your son to a point where, he's always going to have we're always going to kind of be around, circling but maybe we're peering in the windows a little bit, not, with our arm on his shoulder, or however she put it. But that's how I think
Yeah.
about it.
Right.
It's not that you're uninvolved. It's just the involvement looks different.
Exactly.
Um, and,
Yes.
and I think we ought to promote that as opposed to just, peeling the Band-Aid. And I hope that's where we're going. But unfortunately, these proposals that I've been following, they're kind of just sitting in Congress somewhere
Yeah.
collecting dust. And
Mm-hmm.
um, we'll
Yeah.
see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Thank you so much for doing
You're
this.
welcome. You're
I
welcome.
don't have any other questions. Well, I will the second we get off, but I really appreciate you doing this. I hope people listening found some utility in this. And again, I hope you would join me again, and maybe we could break down certain topics a little bit more.
Yes, I would
Um,
love that. That would be
that's
great.
great. I'm
Yeah.
holding you to it.
All right. No problem. I loved
It's
it.
on a recorded line. Great.
All right.
Well, Dr. Heather Pane, superstar, thank you so much for joining me. And to everybody, I got to make the social media plug. It's not my thing, but the like, subscribe, comment, share. We want to be able to reach as many families as we can. And on behalf of the Serviceberry Group, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Branch Network podcast. And Heather, one more time, thank you. I'm
Thank
sure I'll
you.
see you in a few days anyway.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All the best, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.